I'm going to go ahead and get started. First and foremost, thank you for being here this evening as part of a very important dialogue that we're having around our schedule for moving into the 21-22 school year. I'd like to really honor and show you some gratitude for your attendance here tonight. We know that we've had the most unique 15 months possible. And by that, I mean from the perspective as a student, first and foremost, parents, obviously, and also educators. It's been a very challenging 15 months, and the grace and resiliency among our school community has been very appreciated, I know, by many. As we get into this, the events this evening, I want to share who is kind of present in the room, so to speak. So if you take a look at the list of panelists here, I'm the proud principal of Laguna Beach High School. My name is Jason Allman. We have Miss Nicole King, assistant principal, who also plays the role of AP test coordinator on our campus. We have assistant principal, Mr. Dale Miller, who is the lucky person that gets to build out our master schedule whenever we decide what we're doing for the year to come. We have Miss Pallon, our lead counselor here at Laguna Beach High School. Ms. Holtz from the science team is currently a chemistry and integrated science teacher, and she has done a lot of integral research in the process as we explore scheduling options moving into the 21-22 school year. We have Ms. Merritt, who is a AP Physics and Intro to Engineering teacher in the science team. We have Ms. Val Quigley, who's in advanced mathematics and part of the math team. Mr. Alvarez from Social Sciences, Government Econ. Mr. Brobeck, who teaches high-level English on campus. And of course, my secondary partner in site leadership, that is Mr. Joe Vidal, principal at Thurston Middle School. Thank you for participating with us this evening. And most importantly, we have Mr. Soren Teeple and Ms. Joanna Legal, who are both LBUSD student board reps, but more importantly, seniors at Laguna Beach High School, class of 2021. And of course, last but not least, our amazing LBHS PTA president, but also a sophomore parent himself, Mr. Jimmy Azadian, is going to be participating on our panel, and will be supported this evening by Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, Dr. Chad Mayberry, and our Public Information Officer, Shelly Spressard, who will be monitoring the Q&A. So thank you all for being here this evening. I'd like to progress through our agenda so that we can kind of just give you a brief overview. If you were lucky enough to participate in the Thurston Middle School Forum, you may see some similarities, but you also might see a little bit of contrast in how we share and tell our story this evening, because we've been on a little bit of a different journey here at the high school. And I hope you're looking forward to hearing a little bit about that story from myself and our panelists here this evening. We'll obviously make some connections to what we've got going on the health and safety front. We'll do a brief overview of our district-wide goals and commitments, share a little bit about the stakeholder engagement process, talk about the scheduling timeline that's been specific to Laguna Beach High School and our experience, the interest and themes that we've gleaned from staff, students, and parents. Obviously, talk a little bit about a general overview of scheduling options, share a little bit of AP data because that has been at the forefront of a lot of questions from our parent community, and of course, entertain questions and hopefully answers as we go into a public comment section of our presentation. So first, I'd like just to do a quick overview on the next slide of the health and safety guidelines. As you know, and we're all tired of hearing, but we have to acknowledge that we utilized guidelines from the California Department of Public Health. But it is also important to note as we move forward in these lesser restrictive environments that we're hopefully moving into as we potentially transition into the yellow tier in the coming weeks. We still have to take into consideration the guidelines from the CDPH, but also since we are an employer, we also have to take into account the Cal OSHA guidelines. Now, the difference really that I'm finding between the two in my new experience in navigating all this is that your Cal OSHA guidelines are typically a bit more restrictive than what the CDPH has outlined. And that will most likely continue to be a trend. We are hopeful that CDPH and Cal OSHA have some alignment at some points in time moving forward as we move into the yellow tier. But as you can see, and you're very aware of, if you're a student, staff, or parent, all the health and safety guidelines we've implemented within our campuses and for our daily environments that our students learn in. The next slide, it just kind of highlights our guiding principles as a team here within the Laguna Beach Unified School District. And obviously, we're about students first and foremost, and we want to operate around the core values of responsibility, commitment, equity, courtesy, and transparency in all that we do. And we know that those values can be challenged and compromised at times, but we are, in this process, we are taking our best approach as it relates to our core values. And then to highlight our LCAP goals and commitments, obviously we want to consistently increase student academic achievement and support their socio-emotional strength, especially at the high school, but it's a district-wide outcome that we all are focused on, and that is having multiple options for our students as they conclude their high school experience. And we want them to have multiple options within college and career pathways. We focus a lot on professional development, dedicating a lot of time and resources to that process for our staff. Obviously, we have state-of-the-art facilities, technology, and infrastructure on our campuses. And having been principal at 3 different schools in 3 different districts, I really am appreciative of that item number 4 as we navigate our day-to-day work. And then obviously ongoing stakeholder involvement. And for me, first and foremost, the reason I'm here, reason a number of our panelists are here, it all revolves around our students. I wanted to share with you a little bit of a story of our timeline as we move through this presentation to give you a frame of reference and share a little bit about what we've done, where we've been as it relates to Laguna Beach High School and scheduling options. So this is my 4th year here. My duration here is in alignment with our current senior class of 2021. So when Soren and Johanna were freshmen, I was a freshman here at the high school as a principal. During the 18-19 school year, we started really having serious questions around scheduling options for us moving forward into the 19-20 school year. This started with some conversations and focus around our student group, and then really was initiated by an issue with instructional minutes on our campus and not being in alignment with the minimum required instructional minutes. In addition to that, Senate Bill 328, which talked about a later start time for schools, that actually it's nice to be ahead of the curve on that, but it won't go into effect until school year 22. So that kind of started our conversation around what scheduling could look like. It led us to implementing a waterfall or rotating schedule. And that was based on a variety of touch points that students and staff shared along the way as it related to perspectives. And we'll highlight those later. But then unfortunately, as we moved into March of 2020, we all know and don't need to be reminded of what happened there, but we did have to shutter our schools and transition into an online learning environment. But during those 2 phases, we had a constant strive for ongoing reflection and feedback, which is where we had an opportunity to ask our students about their learning experience during that online spring. We got a lot of good information about that, specifically around the amount of course load that they had to navigate their 6 courses during a distance learning or virtual learning environment. It led us, obviously, that and some guidelines from the health and safety departments led us to consider and implement a trimester cohort system moving into the 2021 school year. Now, while we may have been faced with some challenging circumstances and less than ideal situations. The work that we have done at the high school campus has always, and you see that, and I can't reiterate it enough, but it's always been student-centered and with a focus on their experience as they navigate high school. At this point in time, we obviously, with what's on the horizon for us here, we explored staff, student, and parent interests in what they really have experienced in the last 15 months. And we utilized the Thought Exchange platform, and we navigated this with staff first, and then co-jointly with parents and students. And at this point in time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Alvarez, who can share his reflections on the staff interest findings.
Great, thank you, Dr. Allman. Appreciate it. Happy to be here and talk a little bit on behalf of some of the faculty at Laguna Beach High School. So I think I'll start by saying the staff was not enamored with the waterfall schedule. And when you look at some of their feedback, here are a few points. Fewer classes at a time would allow for a greater focus on learning and building student connections. Or what a wise Laguna Beach physics teacher told me earlier today. Her name rhymes with ferret. Students have more time to focus on content, and teachers have more time to focus on supporting students, which we find is very important. Students have choice and flexibility in scheduling, and then also reducing conflict between instruction time and athletics for students. We've never had a designated period for athletics, and with the 4-by, that fourth period can be designated for athletics. Options that allow for smaller classes lends to better learning and feedback for students, and a desire to commit to a plan as soon as possible. Our staff is incredibly talented. They can pivot on a dime. I feel really lucky to work with them, to be honest. However, the one thing I consistently hear is they want time to schedule ASAP, to plan their curriculum, to map it out, and to do the best job that they know they can do. So turn it over back to you, Dr. A.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. I appreciate you sharing the reflections from the staff. On our next slide, I'm going to ask that Mr. Azadian and Mr. Teeple share the student and parent interests that were the general takeaways of the Thought Exchange for the past 15 months and reflecting on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Allman. Yeah, so starting off, I think the decreased load, and not necessarily a decreased time load, but the decreased course load, I think definitely helped me, and it helped a lot of other students and parents as well, to focus more on the classes you have. And then certainly a later start time. I appreciate sleep, and I think that's super, super important for our health, and that definitely helped me a lot. I'll pass off to you, Mr. Azadian.
Thank you, Soren. Thank you, Dr. Alleman. Our students valued the rotating schedule in 2019 and 20 more so than the parents. And our parents expressed reservations about continued changes and adjustments to the schedule. Also, there was an interest in moving away from the trimester cohort system.
And just to end it off here, I think I really appreciate this point. With having fewer classes at a time, and the schedules we'll look at also offers more opportunities to explore taking additional classes beyond the core classes, where I believe that I know that I have found my passions in theirs, and I believe that other students can as well. And the classes that aren't necessarily mandated, but where you can just take a fun class, like, or not necessarily a fun, easy class necessarily, but I mean, there's a class to explore your passions and learn more about something that you wouldn't necessarily have learned about from a core subject.
Thank you, Mr. Teeple and Mr. Azadian. Also, I'd like to give Mr. Azadian an opportunity to just share briefly his reflections as a sophomore parent on campus. And by that, I mean, you have a student who's a sophomore, but you're a sophomore high school parent.
Right. I think the days are over where I could pass as a sophomore probably, but I'll take the compliment if you're giving it. Let me just say that I'm here in my capacity, as Dr. Alleman said, as the parent of a Breaker sophomore, and not in any of my other capacities, whether it be for the PTA or for any of the other organizations that I'm a part of. My experience has been mostly positive from an academic success perspective. My sophomore, Ashton, has had only 2 or 1 core academic classes each trimester, compared to the 4 core academic classes he had each semester when he was a freshman, and that was in the prior school year. We did feel at times that the core academic classes each trimester moved at a rigorous pace and required quite a bit of extra independent study to master comprehension of the subjects. However, the teachers each thoughtfully and generously provided extra tutorial time for one-on-one Zoom sessions with my son to answer his questions and to help him master comprehension of the subjects being taught in class. The advanced and AP curriculum has probably been the most challenging aspect of the trimester system from my own perspective, and I believe from the perspective of my son. In terms of athletics, I felt that Ashton, who is on the JV basketball team, would benefit from more daily and weekend practices than what was allotted to the players throughout the school year. Once we returned to on-campus learning, the academic and athletic schedules seemed easier to manage for both my son and me. But what remained a challenge was mastering the advanced and AP curriculum in the short amount of time that material and coursework must be mastered in the final trimester window. What has been a very welcomed feature of the trimester model, and I agree with Soren on this, it's been the later start time, the 9 a.m. start time for school. I think this has allowed for an extra hour or so of sleep, which I think is very important for growing teenagers and better health. You had asked me, Dr. Alleman, if I had any issues or concerns, or more importantly, if Ashton, my sophomore, has had any issues or concerns. And so I'll focus on his issues or concerns. Overall, the trimester system has gone smoothly and has not raised serious concerns or issues for Ashton, with the exception of the condensed learning that has had to take place in his advanced and AP classes. Looking forward to the coming year, I'm of the tentative view that AP classes would strongly benefit from year-long study so that those students can be, and my son can be, best prepared for his end-of-year college board exams and not have any kind of time gap between when the course ends and when he is to take the AP exams. I don't know if this is a correct presumption or what the data shows in terms of scheduling for AP classes in connection with student success on the end-of-year AP exams. A minor turbulent point was with the juggling of Ashton's year-long elective in the current school year trimester model. In Ashton's case, his year-long elective is ASB, which is a class that meets throughout the year and is not confined to a single trimester or a single semester. Consequently, Zoom ASB class meetings were the norm 3 to 4 times each week during the school year, with half of them in the early morning, 8 a.m., and the other half in the afternoon once the school day had ended. Additionally, it is unclear to me how the grading will occur for the year-long courses, such as ASB, when the student has been in the trimester learning system. Another issue for Ashton has been the infrequency of his athletics practices. As I mentioned before, I realize that athletics practices must follow rigid health and safety guidelines during the pandemic, and most of that was really outside of our discretion as a school. So I'm simply pointing out what he would have liked to have more basketball practices and during that school year and the current school year, as he felt the JV basketball team would have really benefited from those practices in tackling the basketball season. Dr. Alleman, you had also asked me how my sophomore has navigated his learning experience and all of the changes. And this was an opportunity for me to pause and reflect and to really engage with Ashton on this subject. And I really am glad you asked me that question. What I learned from him is that I noticed that Ashton has demonstrated flexibility, nimbleness, and resilience through all of the changes over the past 15 months. Now, not all of these changes were welcome, but what as a parent I'm most proud of is that my son was able to roll with these changes and demonstrate that flexibility, nimbleness, and resilience. In his case, as I think is true of most teenagers, when it comes to changes in schedules, his first reaction is concern and doubt, usually followed by an understanding for the change, and then an acceptance, followed by a level of comfort that sets in. What I've noticed is that my attitude and how I respond as a parent to a given change, whether it's at school or, in his club basketball or wherever, my reaction will be something that he reflects or emulates. So if I'm distrusting or unhappy with a given change, he will emulate my reaction. And I think that has been a mindfulness moment for me to come to terms with, because I didn't really realize how much of an impact I could have as a parent, just in terms of my initial reaction to something. For this reason, I found it to be important to be positive and kind of be a model of a growth mindset, even if I don't necessarily believe it, but just to model that positivity when it comes to the changing landscape for education during the pandemic. We consider the change together. Ashton and I, we study it. We ask ourselves how we can benefit from the change and the ways we can find success when the change occurs. We have discussions about how, when Ashton is in college or in his career, he will have to successfully meet and navigate change as it comes his way, and that the common denominators for success in college and in a career are positive attitude, nimbleness, confidence, solution-oriented mentality, and resiliency. Another important feature is asking for help and knowing where to find help. I'm really proud of this as well, because in Ashton's case, he now very regularly emails his teachers, and that's something he didn't really do before. And he emails them with questions and concerns, has one-on-one tutorial sessions with his teachers, and has become more comfortable raising his hand. Whereas before, he did not feel comfortable doing that. And when he didn't understand a concept or an idea. And he has also grown into the role of being his own advocate. And I think I'm probably most proud of that. Asking for the things he needs to accomplish as a young adult, and figuring out what a given task may mean for him, and not being shy to ask for adjustments to be made by teachers and by others that may be reasonable for him.
Thank you, Jimmy. I really appreciate you taking an in-depth and reflective look on your experience as a parent, but also more importantly, Ashton's. And I will have some more information around AP courses and the concerns that go along with that in potential scheduling scenarios. And in addition, just anecdotally, ASB would be graded like a normal, regular year-long class with 2 semester grades, but I can follow up with you on that later. But I appreciate you sharing your reflections. I'd like to get back to our agenda and review our potential scheduling options. And I'd like to start by sharing our experience with what we refer to in our slideshow here as the traditional schedule. But we all know that if we've lived it, that it's our waterfall or rotating schedule. And you can see that this essentially is a block type schedule where there are 6 periods offered throughout the school year. Those 6 periods exist in about a 90-minute window. So here at the high school, our journey on scheduling has really allowed our teachers to experience teaching longer blocks of time and in block courses. And since we've lived this, I took some time to our team, I shouldn't say our team that were reflecting on this and their experience, took the time to identify some interests that were solved in this, and then some challenges that the waterfall schedule created. We had a lot of conversation when we went on this journey about how to prevent or minimize student athletes missing class on campus. And this schedule allowed us to minimize that. Did not allow us to get rid of it, but it minimized it. It also allowed us to start later to meet the standard of SB 328, which requires an 8:30 start time going into the 2022 school year. It met our required instructional minutes. We had an issue around what we used to call SDL, student directed learning. And that was a student option that students could come on campus and participate in that learning. That unfortunately was not, because of how it was offered to students, it wasn't required. It was optional. It was not included in our instructional minutes. So we had to make a correction around that. obviously with the advent of zero period, because now we were starting school later. If you can remember back when we started before 7:30, we were now able to have a zero period. And then a decrease in tests per day because they had a rotating schedule. Students reported that in a traditional schedule, a lot of the tests fell on Thursdays and Fridays. Now with the rotating, it allowed us not to have fixed test dates. Students were able to balance homework and their participation in homework because their classes varied, and then varying times within the schedule. So there was no after lunch class anymore, no first period of the day first period of the day class, since the schedule rotated. Some of the challenges that we faced were reduced opportunity to access electives for students. 0 and 6 period were very different from other classes because they were paced differently since they met every day. Some student athletes were still missing a lot of class. And as an example, a frost-off football game where the regular game occurs on a Thursday, that meant that they missed a lot of the same class. Decreased frequency of contact between students and teachers because they were seeing on average 3 days a week. And then a 4-day week versus 5-day week confusion. Parents, I'm sure you can remember those of that have lived it. When we opened school last year, and we opened, and there were those 4-day weeks because we had some Monday holidays, and then 5-day weeks. We were learning a rotating waterfall schedule, but we were also learning that we also had a schedule for a 4-day week and a 5-day week. Candidly speaking, we adults were much more confused than the students. As a matter of fact, myself and other teachers would ask students what period it was, and we would figure out how the day started and ended based on student information. Many students at that point in time were still going to school before 8:30. We had a total of about 307 students participating in 0 period during that first year of waterfall implementation. That was compared to moving forward with registration process going into this year, since we didn't know what our schedule would look like and we would potentially offer a 0 period. We're down to about a little over 100 students that have an interest in taking a 0 period now moving forward. And then because we included sports in the day, it was 1 seasoned student athletes in year-round athletic classes because that was their class. At this point in time, I'd like to share some other scheduling options that we have under consideration. And I'll let Mr. Miller, the lucky guy who gets to build out our master schedule, explain some of the potential options.
Thanks, Dr. Allman. So the first one here, we're calling our A-B block schedule. And you'll notice that each day is assigned 4 periods, excuse me. And then they rotate on opposite days. So your Monday, Wednesday classes are the same. And your Tuesday, Thursday classes are the same. And then every other Friday, we alternate which week you get 3 periods. So over the course of 10 days in 2 weeks, you would have the same amount of class time for each of your classes. For our athletes, both this 4th and 8th period would be alternating athletics. For example, we could alternate in the pool time between our boys and girls water polo team, having that equitable pool time, or our boys and girls basketball in the gym, or on the field between soccer and football. Whatever it might be, we can alternate those spaces based on whether it's a 4th period or an 8th period for that athletics. At the other day, the athletics would be after that period. So that's just one example, our A-B block, but your normal English class, if it was 2nd period, you would go to it Monday, Wednesday every week, and then every other Friday in that 2nd period slot. Some of the benefits of this, that student gets to take more than 6 classes a year without having to take a 0 period. Our minimum is still going to be 6 classes, and we would explore the opportunity for students who didn't want to take more than 6 classes for having that release time, whether it's at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, based on their needs. So for a student who may want to work or is doing extracurriculars outside of school, they could have that 4th or 8th period open to not participate in it. There's more opportunity to access electives because of the increased number of opportunities, but it's also going to increase the opportunity for concurrent and dual enrollments. And we know that there's a big community push for encouraging our students to take these dual enrollment classes or concurrent enrollments with our local colleges. There's more academic opportunities for our student athletes. They're able to get more classes in and be able to experience more. It's less complicated for scheduling. Student athletes would be able to be released from school with a smaller impact on their instruction, and it would still enable us to have our smaller class sizes. A 4x4 block, the other one that has been discussed, this is where you would have 4 classes each semester. Classes last a semester in length, and you would only have those 4 classes. Again, we would embed our athletics into that 4th period. And there are some creative ways that we're exploring to be able to do that. But here it's very straightforward. Every day you have the same classes, and you only have those classes for a semester. At the semester, you switch classes and you begin again. Same benefits as the AB block, but this one is also extremely uniform, right? Every day you have the same classes and you have the exposure to that teacher every day.
Dale, Mrs. Merritt's going to share these benefits.
I don't have my notes. Go ahead, Ms. Merritt.
So I'm going to speak just from the teacher perspective on, things that as a teacher, I think are going to benefit our students. One thing is the classes are all uniform. I taught a 0 period last year, and the pacing was completely different than my other classes in terms of it was the same number of minutes just spread across a different number of days. So I think that will clean that up. I think we're still going to allow our student athletes to be able to take classes and not miss as much instructional time. I think that was one of the things that really pushed us to change our schedule to that waterfall schedule, was valuing our athletes and the fact that they are going to have early releases. And so how can we minimize that impact in their courses? The goal is for our students to take 6 classes a year without having to do a 0 period, having to start that early morning time. But if students want to, they can choose to take more than 6 classes. And I think it really opens up opportunities for our students who want to have those opportunities. They can take more electives. Their sport doesn't have to be their elective anymore. They can take a more creative elective. They can take an elective in terms of another AP class if they want to. And in terms of remediation, it builds time into our day to have that remediation period. So our students that need that extra help, whether it's in math or writing or EL or just plain study skills, they need someone to just be on them. They can have that period open in their day where they can get that extra help, that support for the time they need. It may be a lot of our students need that on-ramp the first 6 weeks of the school year. And so we can build that in, to that schedule where they have that period of extra help, extra support. And maybe after 6 weeks, they don't need that anymore and they can take it out of their schedule without impacting all their other classes. They're not locked in to that support class the entire year. So I think it really helps our students who need that extra help, and it helps our high flyers who want to take more classes and to accelerate. And the other benefit, I think, after living the waterfall schedule, there were definitely benefits to it, but one of the things that was a downside was if a student was absent from my course, I didn't see them for 2 days or more because of the way the waterfall schedule worked. And so this everyday contact allows students to be able to catch up more quickly and just be able to connect with their teacher in terms of what it is they're missing. We'll be able to reduce our class sizes because now we're going to take our classes and spread them out over 8 periods. And so it will bring down our class numbers. And that is going to allow us to have less complicated scheduling. So I'm from the perspective of I teach AP Physics, and AP Physics has always been a singleton as long as I've been here. I'll average 35, 36 kids in the class. But it's a big class and it's a singleton. And I've had years where I've had students who want to take dance 4, and it just happens to be the same period. Or I've had students that want to take my AP physics class and AP music theory, and it's the same period. Like, we're a small school and we can only offer our classes in so many spots. And I think reducing our class numbers is actually going to take our singletons to become doubletons. And so it provides more flexibility in our schedule so that students don't have to make that choice of which class do I want to take, because now we can offer one in semester one and one in semester two. And so from that perspective, I think that's helpful in terms of scheduling for our students. And it allows our kids to take their AP classes like over the entire year, so they're not slammed. Some of our high flyers are taking 5 or 6 AP classes at one time, and that's a lot of work. So it allows them to spread it out. And Mr. Alvarez pointed this out. My biggest concern is I want to have a lot of time with my kids, and that's my focus. That's my passion. I want to be able to support all my kids when I can. And for our students to have less time, or our students are going to have less content to focus on with fewer classes, but for our teachers, we're going to have less students. So we'll be able to focus on them more. And I think that's just a huge benefit that we've seen in the trimester model, that with less students, we've been able to really touch with our kids more. Like, we've been able to contact them more. We've been able to give more meaningful feedback because we're not grading as many things. So I think that is going to be a huge benefit if this schedule is going to go forward.
And I'd like to add something to Mrs. Merritt's comments. For an AP calculus teacher, there will be an opportunity for seniors, for example, to take AB in the first semester, and then if they choose to do so, they could take BC the second semester. So so that gives an opportunity for more students to reach the BC level of calculus. I've had a lot of kids who wish that they could have done BC, but they just started at a different time period. So they were only able to take AB. So they would have the opportunity to do both classes.
Thank you, Ms. Quigley and Ms. Merritt. Moving right along.
So these will be posted with our plan, with our presentation online. You'll be able to review these as well. But we just wanted to give a couple sample plans, whether it was with the waterfall, whether it was with the AB schedule, or whether it was with the 4x4. Again, we want to emphasize that as a freshman, we wouldn't encourage all students to take 8 classes. We'd want them to come in, experience the high school rigor that our teachers provide, and get the students comfortable with the type of learning and the environment that's here. But then it would enable them to continue their progression through, whether it's a desired CTE pathway, whether it's to advance in math or science, or in another elective offering, a VAPA offering, to dive deep into that. They'd have that opportunity their sophomore, junior, and senior years.
Thank you, Dale. We obviously have had a lot of questions around AP scores and testing and how that might, there's maybe if there are some comparative data sets out there. So I'd like to have Ms. King and Ms. Holtz take an opportunity to share our general findings as a campus, but then also go on a little bit of a deeper dive around AP data. And remember, when we talk about AP data, we're talking about less than 1/3 of our school population. But Ms. Holtz, Ms. King, sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Alleman. So if you look here, the data indicates that our AP student scores have held strong. And when we think about the trimesters this year, I just want to give a shout out to our tireless AP teachers that have worked with our dedicated AP students through tutorials, which they've done historically, provided those tutorials before the test. But this year in our trimester system, they've really worked hard with the kids to provide those tutorials and those primers along the way to bridge those gaps between the trimester systems. So if we can go to the next slide, where we can kind of compare the data from other schools in our similar enrollment. So as we look at the chart, you can see that AP scores hold strong, whether in the 4x4 or the trimester system, or even the 6-period AP block. So if you look at all of the different schools that are in our similar areas, the data really is strong that we can be in a 4x4 system and still be successful whether in the trimester or the 4x4. Ms. Holtz, did you want to add anything? Okay.
And just to wrap up, this kind of concludes our presentation with the next steps. And obviously, we have our community forum going on this evening. We'll continue to do our ongoing conversation with department leads around building out scheduling for specific teacher course schedules, but also how that may fit into any scheduling option we choose moving forward. Obviously, as if you were a participant in Mr. Vidal's middle school forum, we will have ongoing discussions. We'll be pushing out events where we can have some Q&A and discussion around anything concern that maybe didn't get addressed this evening. Also, we'll attempt to address questions this evening, but if they don't get answered, we will have a FAQ document that we will include and push out to our parent community. So again, thank you for listening, and now we'll move into the Q&A portion of our presentation, and Ms. Bresser, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here with our high school family, and appreciate those of our school board members that are on the line as well. Thank you for being here tonight. We will start our first question with a question about the 4x4. So the question is, with the 4x4, there's a limited amount of classes a student can take year long. If a student needs to take more than a set amount of year-long classes, what would you propose for a solution?
So I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. So if there's limited year-long courses, well, the idea in a 4x4 block schedule would be that most courses would be a semester in length. So students would take, essentially in a high school setting, the ideal scenario, if we were to implement a 4x4 schedule, would be that students would take 3 courses on average the first semester, and then 3 additional courses the second semester. That could go above and beyond that 3 limit per semester as appropriate, or if a student had an interest in acceleration or in like a world language pathway, that student could potentially take, well, hypothetically could take 2 courses within a school year.
Thank you. The next question we have is, how would a 4x4 schedule affect students on IEPs and 504 plans?
If we were to implement a 4x4 schedule, I don't see a lot of change as it relates in how we would be able to support a student that had a 504 plan or an IEP. I do think that it provides a compelling opportunity for us as a staff to explore new and innovative ways to support students like that. And the first example that pops into my head is something less about earning credits or units in like a directed studies class, but more of a kind of fluid, itinerant learning opportunity for a kid where they struggle, let's say, in factoring equations. So they get the support and help they need specifically focused around that issue in mathematics. And when they show mastery, they're able to exit out of that because we have potentially time built in a schedule that allows for that fluidity to happen, as opposed to someone being committed to, an additional course because, they're not good at math or reading.
Thank you. How will math and foreign language retention be supported for 9th and 10th graders that are not accelerating into the next semester?
Well, that's obviously something that keeps me up at night here and there, especially after navigating the trimester system. But one thing that we have moving forward is we'll have access to a new data set, right? When we do our testing later this week, we're using the iReady platform in mathematics and English. And we will learn about any potential gaps that our 9th through 11th grade students would have. And we would craft ways to address those gaps as needed. Additionally, with conversations around education professionals on this matter, by education professionals, I'm referring to my amazing team of teachers on our campus, where we're talking about navigating this third trimester learning experience for students. So for example, Mr. Brobeck, who's on our panel this evening, we were sharing after a school leadership team meeting the other day, how, he's got students in his trimester 3 English course that for all intents and purposes had a gap in English language arts instruction since June of last year, potentially. And before that, we were, in person in March. And, he's said that he's seen a lot of kind of standard progress and no major concerns as it relates to, what we're calling as a school community learning loss. I think it's important for us also to remember how our students get a lot of learning, especially in language arts, in other areas of coursework that they take and navigate. And I think if you ask any one of our, especially our core academic teachers, if there's pressing issues around that concern after this year, we do not see that currently.
Thank you. If a student is ill and misses 2 days of coursework in the 4x4 model, can you talk to us a little bit more about, would that be comparable to them missing 2 days in the trimester model they're asking, or how would that affect their academics? Question that just came in.
I mean, I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in, maybe a teacher, but from a mathematics standpoint, when they miss 1 day of the class, they miss 1/90th of the class in a 4x4 block, versus if they missed a day in a traditional schedule block, they'd miss 1/180th. But teachers, I don't know if you want to share, how you might help a student get caught up in an absence scenario like that.
I do just want to point out that in our waterfall schedule, if it were to miss 2 days, it was likely that we would not see them for a whole week. Because the way the classes rotated, you could go a full week without seeing a student when they were absent. In a 4x4 situation, when they come back to school, you see them right away. And you have 90 minutes of time, which most teachers will have a varied instructional practices, which means there is built-in time there to work with your students one-on-one, especially those who need catching up from being absent. So just having that time built in really makes that easier from a teacher perspective, and just not having so much gap between.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but even in our waterfall schedule, it was still block days. And so the time missed was still similar to what it would be in either of the other 2 block days. Is that correct?
I'm not entirely sure I understand what you're.
In the waterfall schedule, they were still longer periods because you were only seeing them a couple of times a week. So a day missed in our traditional schedule of that waterfall would be the same time missed as a block schedule, whether it's a 4x4 or the year-long AB block.
Correct. So in the waterfall schedule, the classes were 90 minutes long. In the 4x4 schedule, the classes are also 90 minutes long. The difference being that the student would, in a 4x4, miss 2 classes in a row for the same class. In the waterfall, it is unlikely that they would miss 2 of the same class in a row. However, it is not impossible how the waterfall rotates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get back to first period on Monday and Tuesday. So if you miss Monday and Tuesday in the waterfall schedule, you would miss first period 2 times. So it is not something that we haven't dealt with as teachers and as students.
Thank you. Our next question is around selection of courses. So a parent has a concern that a child selected their courses. Will there be an opportunity to revisit that course selection if a 4x4 model is chosen?
If we implement any model, and I'll let Angela chime in on this, but our course selection and registration process would fit in any one model that we choose moving forward, because they had ample opportunity to select the appropriate amount of courses. Ms. Pallon, would you care to elaborate on that process?
Sure. We recommend balance for all of our students. So 6 classes in their freshman year. If a student wanted to accelerate or chose to accelerate, we could have that individual conversation to figure out how we would navigate that, like planning out moving forward. But from what I've seen in my 10 years at Laguna Beach is that when a student overextends themselves, their grades are often impacted in a way that is not a reflection of their ability, but it's a reflection of that extension. And we want our students to be portrayed in the best light possible, to take classes in areas of interest, understand that in the 4x4, there would be the potential to have students accelerate. So we would love to have those conversations and map that out. Would not be recommending that in a student's freshman year. But
I appreciate what Ms. Pallon is saying, is because when we did a course request analysis, and unfortunately for me as a high school principal, I find a lot of our freshmen and sophomores take advantage of heavy course loads and then not really consistently continuing that through their junior and senior year because they've checked all their boxes, so to speak. Now, if they're out doing other extracurricular activities and learning experiences, that's great. But there is some value in assimilating to the high school lifestyle, so to speak, and then really challenging yourself your sophomore, junior, and senior year with that course load stuff. So thanks, Ms. Pallon, for sharing your perspective on that registration process.
Thank you so much for providing those answers. Our next question is around what is driving the change? And we've had several people ask if the traditional schedule had flaws that maybe they weren't aware of. If you could talk a little about what is driving the need for change.
Well, as I shared earlier, there are certain circumstances that aren't necessarily directly related to educating young adults, but we always have taken those circumstances and utilized it as an opportunity to explore, reflect on our practice, and really winnow down what is best and right for students in navigating their high school experience. So when we are taking under consideration the potential move away from a traditional schedule of a 6 periods per school year schedule and having an opportunity to have a block, either A, B, or 4x4 that allows 8 courses throughout the school year, that does a number of other things for us too. It potentially reduces the student to teacher ratio because now teachers would, for all intents and purposes, be teaching an additional course, right? So they'd be teaching, instead of on our traditional schedule 5 out of 6, they'd be teaching 6 out of 8. That lowers numbers of students in classes for us. That is typically a good scenario for students. And as you've heard, a number of benefits from a variety of teachers would be that they more focus on content and the ability to focus on supporting students. To me, being student-centered and student-focused, those are 2 pretty significant benefits.
Thank you. Another question is, how will the 4x4 model affect students in performing arts and music courses through the year?
From my perspective, it will be a potential positive impact because students will have access for more electives. And it's not just around visual and performing arts, but the visual and performing arts teachers have an opportunity to have more versatility in how they teach, what they teach with the students they be with, either for a semester or a year, because students may have room in their schedule to actually explore those course titles and find a new interest, which is always great when students can find new interests and connections on campus.
Thank you. And we have time for about one more question, and I'll let you close this out. Could you talk to us about how class sizes will be smaller and what smaller looks like?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, it's just a simple mathematics equation, right? So if I had a school of 10 teachers and they all taught 5 sections, that would be 50 classes. Now I have a school of 10 teachers, they all teach 6 sections, that would be 60 courses to offer students. So if I had 100 students, they would be evenly divided over those 6 courses instead of 5. So now we're going from a classroom size of 20 teachers. Please don't get excited, we're not there yet, but we're going from a class size of 20 to a class size of 18. That's just a simple equation because you're having more full-time teachers teach more classes for the same amount of students, is the simple answer to that.
All right, and we have about 3 minutes left. If you want to go ahead and close this out and let people know that we will be answering the questions and providing that for them.
Absolutely. Dr. Spresser, thank you so much for your help in monitoring and running the Q&A. That was very smooth for us. And I wanted to remind you, Dale, if you can move back to the previous slide of my follow-up timeline, next steps. I just want to make sure that you are aware that we will be pushing out an FAQ with a variety of questions that have been posed prior to today, but also going into tonight and beyond. If you see there in the lower right-hand corner, that's my email and you know where to find me. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions, concerns, or if you have a need for dialogue or conversation around a particular issue. Please be reminded too that I'll speak on behalf of the entire staff. We feel so fortunate and blessed to work with your young adults. They're amazing people and they're going to go on to do amazing things. And nothing that we do in any of these processes compromises our vision to support and really help our students have as many options as possible as they navigate their high school experience, but also, beyond high school. We want to make sure we hear amazing success stories from students when they're 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years out of high school. And we're lucky enough that we do get to hear those because we have such a connected community. Parents and students come back and share their stories and experiences. And they're usually founded in their positive experience here at Laguna Beach High School. So I want to thank you guys as stakeholders on the panel and stakeholders in our community for being a part of an amazing learning community for our young adults. I appreciate it. As your principal, thank you.